All right, guys, I'm Corey Frederick. I'm here with the Tyrant Network podcast. Today, off the mat, we have Chris Locke, who is the founder of Unlock the Light Foundation. Chris, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Corey. Thanks for having me.
As always, I just want to give a little bit of a background and then just kind of jump right into it. But Chris is originally from New York, correct?
Correct. You'll hear the New York accent as we go along here.
Yeah, but he currently resides and lives and works in Delaware. He graduated from University of Delaware and then went on to get his law degree at Catholic University of America, Columbus School of Law. I know he has plenty of other jobs or professional experience, but currently he's at Lang Development, where he's general counsel and senior vice president of the company. So ultimately, you're a lawyer, but you kind of went into the real estate side of things. Really what we're going to talk about today, though, is the organization that you founded and why you founded it and all those types of things. So, and that's how we met. I called you out of the blue. I guess it's probably been 2 or 3 years now.
Maybe 4, actually. Yeah.
But I know I picked up the phone and called you out of the blue. Don't know if you get that much. And really, I was just looking for a good organization that we could kind of give back to, my wife and I, in our business. So, but why don't I just turn it over to you right away, and then we'll get to talking about some other things. But tell us a little bit about Unlock the Light Foundation, how and why you founded it, and just the history of it itself.
Sure. So, I'm glad to be here today. And I know probably a lot of your listeners are athletes and maybe parents of athletes. So I, just like all your listeners, are a parent of athletes. My son Sean was an elite athlete. He played basketball and baseball at St. Mark's High School, local high school here, and he excelled at both sports. As he was getting through his high school career, he was having all sorts of scholarship offers to play both college baseball and college basketball. Decided to play Division I basketball at the University of Delaware. And had a great career. Had an injury his senior year of high school, which we can delve into later on. But really lived his dreams. Played in March Madness. Was named captain of the team his senior year. Graduated with honors. He was a 3-time academic All-American. And then graduated and got a great job with a large development company in Wilmington, Delaware. So as a dad, I thought, okay, all is good. He's well on his way. He's lived a great life so far. He's going to have much to look forward to in the future. But what I did not know was that Sean suffered with depression, anxiety. And like so many athletes, they held it in. They were suffering in silence. And Sean and I were very close. We spoke every single day, but he never was able to speak to me about his struggle with depression and anxiety. And it came as a gigantic shock to us when on July 18, 2018, he took his life because of the insidious disease of depression and anxiety. And it is a disease. Before we lost Sean, I really didn't have a lot of understanding about mental illness. It was only after losing Sean that I realized my poor son was suffering, and he could not verbalize what was going on. And that's the thing about this disease. It almost paralyzes the person to be able to speak about what's going through. And I think there's an extra layer when you're an athlete. Athletes are put on a pedestal, whether they're a wrestler or a basketball player. We put them on a pedestal because they can do things that us mere mortals can't do. And they do it at a very high level. So we see them as this extremely strong person, but really they're just kids that deal with the same stress and pressures that any kid. They just happen to be a good basketball player or a good wrestler. And what do we tell our athletes? Push through the pain, suck it up. And that's all good. I love sports and been involved in sports since I was a young boy. But what makes them a really good athlete, that focus, that discipline, do not make them great candidates when they have to deal with mental health issues. And I think Sean saw his disease as like a torn ACL that he had his senior year, his bad back that he had his senior year at Delaware. I got this. Let me put it over here. I'm dealing with it. But you can't. Just like you can't deal with cancer by yourself, you can't deal with mental illness by yourself. And unfortunately, he did not get the help that he needed to be able to deal with it. So after we lost him, it was devastating. I mean, he was a bigger than life person. The kid always had a smile on his face, everybody loved him. Everybody thought Sean was his best friend. And so many parents came up to us and said, boy, if Sean could do this, any of our kids could do it. And, when you lose a child, and especially when you lose a child to suicide, it's devastating. You never get over that grief. And I kind of rolled up in a ball and wanted the world to go away. But one of Sean's friends, Trevor Cooney, who was also high caliber athlete, played at Syracuse, went to a Final Four a couple times. He was real good friends with Sean, and he wanted to do something. And his idea was to have a basketball game and use sports to get the message of mental health out there. Kind of what you do at your wrestling tournaments. It's more than just a wrestling tournament. I'm always very honored to see when you speak, because you speak from your heart about this very serious subject matter that affects a lot of kids and a lot of parents that come to your tournaments. And so the idea, we're going to have a little tournament, a little basketball game, raise a little bit of money, give it to a national foundation, then let me go back in my hole because I really didn't want to deal with anything. But we had 3,000 people show up to a 2-game tournament, and we raised over 200,000 in one night. So we knew the community was saying, this is a big problem, and we got to do something. And Sean was one of those kids that was always there to help his friends, help his family. So we were like, okay, what can we do? How can we change the conversation? So we started the foundation, some family and some friends, and we have 3 missions. The first is to educate. So I go to schools, corporations, businesses, anybody who's listening. If you need us to come and speak to your group, we do it all free of charge, no matter where you are in the country. And we do it because our first mission is to remove the stigma, to have an open and honest conversation about mental illness, but also about suicide. There's this myth out here. Don't talk about suicide. You don't want to put the thought in people's heads, but it's just the opposite. The more we have open conversations, the more those people who are suffering will finally ask for help. And then the second part is assist. We try to help those young adults find the resources that they need, because it's so hard when you're dealing with this disease to really have a clear thought of how to get help. So we try to help them with that. And we try to help the parents. So many parents, and I was in this group, think they did something wrong, or there's something wrong with their kid. But it's a disease. It's like saying, my kid got cancer because he did something wrong. Man, he didn't do anything wrong. You didn't do anything wrong. The disease just got it. It's indiscriminate, just like any other disease. It doesn't care how great your kid is at a particular sport or how smart they are. It's a disease. And then we help the parents navigate that as well. And then we put our money where our mouth is. So if a kid needs to see a mental health professional, but he or she cannot afford it, we've started an SL24 scholarship where we'll pay for it. No questions asked, for as long as they need it, because we want to make sure all the barriers for them to get help is alleviated so they can get the help. And then the last part is support, and that's where Sean's House comes in. And now we've started these Sean's rooms at various high schools and locations. And Sean's House is a place where kids can come drop in, hang out if they want, grab a soda, grab some cookies, or maybe speak to somebody if they're going through something. We have created this program called Peer 24. And we've trained 200 young adults over the last 3 years who know what it's like to deal with depression, anxiety, the stress of being a student athlete, the stress of being sexually assaulted, maybe in high school or college, whatever that trauma may be. They've lived it, and they volunteer their time and wait for that kid to come through. And then they can have maybe that first conversation about what they're dealing with, and then match that conversation with action. How can we help you? What level of help do you need? And then we try to find those resources for that particular individual. We've been open for 3.5 years. We've had 24,000 kids now come through the front door. We've had over 4,500 use that peer program, and we've saved 107 kids from a suicidal situation. I had no idea when we opened up Sean's House we would see those sorts of numbers so quickly, but I think that shows as a society just how bad the situation is and how many of our young people are struggling. We started off with it was going to be from age 14 to 24. That's what Sean's house was going to be. But we've had kids as young as 8 and 9 come in, and we've had people as old as 36, 38 come in. And we're really there for whoever needs to talk to somebody.
So did you start, was the basketball tournament first and then you started the foundation? Okay.
Yeah. The basketball tournament, as I said, we were going to just raise money and give it to another foundation. But then when we saw what was happening, we were like, oh boy. So it went from this, let's do one event and call it a day to, oh boy, we need to really start thinking. And how Sean's house came into being was I had spoke at St. Mark's High School. It was the first time I ever spoke publicly. And about 2 days later, I got a call from a mom and said her 17-year-old son heard me speak and he's really struggling. And she didn't know what to do. She didn't want to send him to Rockford or Meadowwood. She just wanted some place for her son to talk to somebody. Here in Delaware, it takes 8 to 10 weeks to get a mental health appointment. We've tried now with our network, we can cut that down to 1 or 2 days to get an appointment. So after speaking to this mom for about an hour and a half, I looked at my wife and I said, I think I know what we're going to do. And that's how Sean's house was born. It was really a conversation we had with another parent.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the questions I had for you. And one, I respect everything you've done, but two, it seems like anytime somebody has tragedy nowadays, they all want to start their own organization. Now, what you've done so far has been amazing, but a lot of other people, I don't think they realize what's involved with a nonprofit and all the things you have to do. And sometimes I wonder, is it just better to partner or support an existing organization instead of starting your own? But maybe a lot of times I think they just want to recognize or keep their own person's name alive. Like everything's in honor of them.
Yeah, look, it's definitely a personal journey. And, if I had to do it all over again, I don't know if I would do it. It takes a tremendous amount of emotional cost. I mean, I have to speak about Sean, and it's a tough conversation to have every time I have it. When I go to a school, I play a video about Sean and, I see his face, I hear his voice, but he's been gone, and it's tough. And you're right, there are a lot of family foundations. I've kind of looked at this. If we're going to do this, let's do it right. Let's get the right people. Let's run it so that it's not constantly fundraising. We have one event. It's the basketball tournament. That's the thing. And I didn't want to always be chasing for the next 90 days, So we run it a tight ship. Every dollar we raise goes to program. There's no headquarters. There's no office space. It's there to do what it's supposed to do. Those 3 mission statements. But yeah, family foundations, most of them only survive 2 or 3 years because there is that emotional connection. And then what do you do after that? And we've been around now 5 years, almost 6 years. And what we're doing is that next generation. So I've been doing this for 5 straight years, speaking to hundreds of places every year. And for this to really go the next step, you have to be able to get professionals to help you. So we've hired some good people to run the operations of Sean's house, to run the foundation, and they'll take it to the next level. And, we've never wanted to be a national nonprofit. We've always wanted to just be the state of Delaware. And that's very important to us. Now, we'll help anybody. If somebody wants to open up a Sean's house in some other location, we'll show you how we did it, and good luck. And we will help you in any way we can. And we've actually done that with the United States Air Force. They have a Sean's house at Fort McGuire up in New Jersey, but they run it. We gave them the blueprint, so to speak, but it's their place. And we're honored they named it after Sean, but they didn't have to do that. And that's kind of the next step, so how do you give this so that it stays long and have an impact on the community well after I can speak or anybody else can speak, because it has to be bigger than me and it really has to be bigger than Sean, for it to have an impact.
Yeah, I mean, the success that I saw firsthand. I mean, I live right. So for the people that are watching, you mentioned Delaware a couple of times, but we're in Newark, Delaware. The Sean's house is on the campus of University of Delaware. I think you actually purchased his frat house and converted it to Sean's house, correct?
And so it was his house that he had roomed with 5 other guys. After he graduated, a fraternity took it over for 4 years. and then we took it back from the fraternity. My real estate partner had owned the house, and just recently the foundation purchased it from the two people that owned the house, and now it is owned by the foundation, which gives it that longevity we're looking about. Now we're not paying rent anymore. We own the house. We can expand the house. It's now an asset for the foundation, which is huge.
Because I feel like that model needs to be taken to as many, if not all, universities and colleges across the country. To your point, you can't do it all. Maybe the organization could as it grows, but you mentioned earlier, and I kind of forgot, and I know they have them at Salesianum and St. Mark's, but the Sean's Room inside the high schools, and maybe that's a more affordable, realistic route to go, is just designate, what used to be a classroom, and make that, a comfortable space where people can go and talk to and get this help or whatever, anybody that's struggling. But, maybe that's another avenue is, it's a little bit easier to push schools to convert a classroom than it is for people to go and buy a house on a campus.
Well, yeah, and Sean's Room, everything that we've done as a foundation has come from a mom or a dad who had an idea, and Sean's Room came from a dad who had a student that was struggling and felt that we needed more resources. So the leadership at St. Mark's talked to us and said, "Hey, yeah, let's do a Sean's Room." And it's really unique. It's a mini Sean's house in the school, and then we have one at the Teen Warehouse, which is a community center in Riverside in Wilmington. It's the poorest section of any place in the state. There is no mental health services there. So we've opened up a place there. And then our third place will be at St. George's, probably in the next 60 days. And, our plan is strategic. Open maybe 2 Sean's Rooms a year, because you got to make sure you have the infrastructure. It's almost like a military operation. Your infantry can't get too far ahead of the supply line. And it's the same thing with Sean's Room. We got to make sure we have enough peers and enough mental health people that can service those rooms. So that's what we're doing. And eventually, we'd like to have a Sean's Room in Kent County and Sussex County, cover the state so these resources are here. And, if, like I said, if somebody wants to do a Sean's house somewhere, man, we'll help you anyway. But I'm too old to be traveling around the country doing it. I made a promise to my wife that that's what I would not do. So we'll help, and it's huge. It's a huge undertaking. You're delving into an area that there's no other Sean's house in the country. We are unique. We are the first and only. And it takes a lot to get it going.
So I know you mentioned wrestling. The podcast, we're going to have all kinds of different guests on here, but my platform per se is when I do run my wrestling tournaments up and down the East Coast and out to Ohio and down to Tennessee. Almost every single tournament in the very beginning, for the part of the morning announcements, we talk about mental health, suicide prevention. So, but if anybody's going to be watching this podcast or listening to this podcast and they've never been to one of my tournaments, on the other side of what you had to deal with. I personally lost my father-in-law. A little background on me, and that's why it's near and dear to my heart too. I lost my father-in-law about 24 years ago, and that was the first time, to my knowledge, that anybody ever committed suicide that I was, friends or family with, and we were completely caught off guard, and we didn't know how to react or what to do. And then, in recent years, we lost 2 of our wrestlers. One was 19 and one was 31. And I always like to kind of say their names when I talk too, because I don't want people to forget about them. So
Yeah.
my father-in-law, it was Jimmy Malk. And one of my wrestlers, like you said, you thought your son was doing great. One of my wrestlers, we knew he struggled with mental health, and he had, quite a few attempts. But we thought, hey, Andrew Riley, he's 31 years old. He bought a house. He's got a good job. He's got 2 kids. He was engaged or married. Man, he's cured. He's fixed. Everything's great. The other one, I don't know that anybody really knew that Alex Cressy, he wrestled for Milford. He was a freshman at Dell State University, ended up taking his life. And then, a kid that had wrestled previously, but then couldn't wrestle in high school when I was coaching at Sanford School due to some concussions. He was a baseball player, but my daughter's good friend, Eric Dewar, he was a student at Westchester University when he took his life. So, it's not something you get used to at all. And, and every time, but, one of the things that I had for you, it's tough because, right, you don't want to drum up too much emotion, but if there's people out there that are watching and listening and they feel like they might be out in an island. And so can you talk about, in the first weeks, months, year, some of the emotions that you went through and how you dealt with it. And when I say that, I mean, like, I think there, for me, you're really upset at first. Then you start thinking that you should have, could have, would have saved them. Then you start having anger because you're mad at them because they left you, when really you go back to, it's an illness. And in most cases, it wasn't a knee-jerk reaction. It's something that they really truly couldn't control maybe at the time. So what are some of the, feelings or emotions that you experience that maybe people that are listening can understand what you're going through?
Yeah. Well, Corey, you and I are, survivors of suicide loss. I mean, that is a true label that we carry for the rest of our life. We have felt the trauma of losing someone to suicide, whether it was your father-in-law or your athletes that you spoke about. And that grief is different than losing somebody, some other way, because it jars you. As human beings, we all want to live forever. We believe we're going to all live to be 100 years old. So when we lose someone that we love so much, and it's done in such a violent way, and done in such a way that we can't wrap our brains around, and there are so many questions you ask. I often talk about suicide and talk about, the movie makes it this very melodramatic and it's planned out, and some suicides are planned out, but most suicide is a spontaneous decision. It's something that happened. There's nothing in Sean's life that day that tells me that he woke up and said, I'm going to end my life today. Something happened in a very small window. And when I mean small window, I mean 20 to 40 minutes. Something happened in that window that darkness and despair was so overwhelming that he truly believed there was no alternative but to end his life. And I've spoken to people who've tried to end their life who have survived. And I said, what are you thinking? I said, aren't you thinking about your mom and dad? Aren't you thinking about your spouse, your friends, your family? All that? They go, no, none of that is in my thought. All I'm thinking is, I can't go another minute like this. I need to end the pain. And it's hard if you don't deal with this disease. It is hard for us to understand it. I have never had that sort of darkness and despair. Look, there was moments after losing Sean that it was pretty dark for me, but that sort of spontaneous decision that there's no other alternative is hard to comprehend, and the grief is insurmountable at times. It still is 5.5 years later. This is a grief you never get over. I am a completely different person now than, after losing Sean than before Sean ended his life. Completely different. And my life is changed for the rest of my life. There's a woman, we have a group that gets together at Sean's house. It's people who've lost loved ones to suicide. We get together once a month. And we have this woman who lost her daughter 20 years ago. And she talks about the grief, that it's a heavy overcoat. And you wear that heavy overcoat for the rest of your life, I apologize. And sometimes, some days, that overcoat is just so heavy that you can barely walk. And other days you wear it, but it's always there. And I think that's what it is. There are days that it's almost unfathomable to get up. But I apologize. But you have to. That's what Sean would want. And he
loved. You have other children too.
I have other children.
You can't stop living.
I have 5 other children, and I have a wonderful wife. And Sean would tell me, "Don't stop living." He would say, "Continue, have a great life, enjoy life, be the person you were." I'm sorry, I don't know why I'm coughing so much. But he would tell me, "Hey, Dad, you didn't do this. This is not your fault. I made a stupid decision." He made a stupid decision. He did not get the help he needed. And unfortunately, he found himself in a crisis moment that he felt there was no alternatives. So you can rationalize it that way, but still, as a dad, you want to be there and protect your children every step of the way. You want to be there and make sure that they can always come to you when they're dealing with something. And I read something years ago about when you lose someone to suicide, one of the toughest questions you ask yourself is, why was my love not enough to keep him here? Didn't he know how much I loved him? Didn't he know I would have done anything for him? His friends and families would have done anything for him, but he didn't, because that disease is so wretched. It is so insidious. It tells them that everybody will be better without them in their lives. And it's a total lie. And here we are 5.5 years later, and it's still hard to talk about it. It's still very hard to talk about it. And I heard, even when you were talking about your father-in-law 24 years later, I could see it still has an impact on you. And it's generational. My daughter has 3 children now. I'm a grandfather. I have a 4-year-old and 2 2-year-olds. And my 4-year-old is now asked me, where's Uncle Sean? What happened to Uncle Sean? Now, Sean was too kind and caring of a person for me to have that conversation with a 4-year-old. And of course, you have it age appropriate, but at some point, we're going to have to tell him the story of his uncle. And it has an impact for generations on people who have never met him.
Yeah, I think, well, so what do they say a lot of times, it's a permanent solution to a temporary problem. But, a lot of times, especially today with social media, and I don't know, it just seems like, and I've experienced it with, some other people that are really close to me that had thought about it or almost made an attempt, whether it was their girlfriend breaking up with them or, maybe an addiction to drugs or alcohol. And they just don't, and it's crazy for them to think that we'd be better without them. Like, I don't understand it, but I'm not at that level. And I've had some deep, dark moments here and there. And even now, like, I think about, even if something was just so crazy and I was living in pain, I feel like I would never be able to do it because I wouldn't want my wife or my kids or my family to ever have to deal with it a second or a third or a fourth time. And I just feel, I feel like and I'm not at that level, but I just feel like, man, I would have to find a way to suffer through it myself so everybody else around me didn't have to suffer. But yeah, I just don't know. So what about like, what thoughts do you have, or what could you share with anybody that might be listening that is not a survivor of someone that committed suicide, but maybe right now they're thinking themselves that life just isn't worth it and they need help? Or what do you think like the next step is, or what do you think we could do to get them just to stop and think for 10 seconds and make a phone call or go and get some help? Or like, what should they know that there is light at the end of the tunnel?
Well, the first thing is, don't suffer in silence. Do not suffer in silence. You have to go speak to somebody, whether it's your spouse, a good friend, a coach, a teacher. You have to go speak to somebody. Do not think you have it in check. It's like saying you got cancer in check. It's a disease. You are not going to be able to solve this problem on your own. You are going to need to talk to a mental health professional, a therapist. You may need medicine, but you are not going to be able to solve it. I think Sean like said, I think he said, well, I got this. I got it. I'm checking it over here, just like my ACL, just like my bad back. And he didn't see that as that old country song, that long black train coming on July 18th. He did not see it coming. And you cannot suffer by yourself. You have got to verbalize. And I get it. The disease paralyzes you to speak about it. It's in your head. I get it. But you have to verbalize it. You didn't do anything. Your brain is an organ, and it's not functioning the way it should be. Just like your heart doesn't function when you have heart disease, just like your blood doesn't function when you have cancer. And so you've got to understand you didn't do anything. So go ask for help and say, look, I'm struggling. If you don't, that silence is going to be deafening. That silence could be deadly. And you've got to be able to verbalize what you're going, because you're going to feel tremendous pressure. When we have kids come in and speak to us, you can literally see the burden leave them just because they were able to have a conversation with somebody about what they're going through, and they feel hopeful that they can get the help that they need.
Yeah, so when I can't remember if it was pre-COVID or during COVID, but when I first started talking about this at our tournaments, originally I was giving the message to high school age kids. And then I think you and I actually probably spoke about, and I had you at one of my tournaments, the junior Beast of the East at St. Mark's High School a year ago. But then it was like, I was worried about putting an idea in people's heads, or when are they too young to start hearing about this? But as I spoke in front of all age groups at our tournaments, and it goes from 6 years old to 18 years old, what I found is not only is it the high school age kid or some of the younger middle school guys, but surprisingly, every single time we talk about it, we have anywhere from 1 to a dozen people come up and share their story, whether it was directly related to them or someone else in their life. But I found that it's middle school kids, it's high school kids, it's parents that lost their jobs. We have a lot of veterans that have returned from fighting for our country that are out at our tournaments. They may or may not still be on active duty, or they're retired, but there's so many different walks of life that have shared their story with us. And that's what kind of keeps me going and sharing it. Now, I've tried to twist and turn it a little bit so it's not too much of a downer before a sporting event. But it's been amazing how many people, the reason why I reached over a second ago, a gentleman, I forget what he does, but he's a union worker somewhere. And they had a meeting. He hears me at my tournaments talk, but he had a work meeting one day. He had to drive like an hour or two to go to this work meeting, and they brought somebody in, and they gave him a token, like one of these gambling chips, and it says suicide prevention awareness, and it has a hard hat, and it says too tough to talk. So, and I'm looking here without my glasses, it says too tough to talk.com. So I think they're really going after like men, and guys that are providers for their family. And then on the back, it has the 988 suicide, and crisis lifeline. But he had brought that token to me at a tournament just to let me know that, hey, some things that were going on. But it's crazy how many people share things or things that are out there. But, and I go back, I think 2 years ago almost now, where there was a kid that comes to a lot of our tournaments, and for whatever reason, he didn't come to a tournament that we had the second weekend of November out in West Virginia, just west of Pittsburgh. And a week later, the coach called me and said, I don't know why he wasn't at your tournament that weekend, but he took his life the weekend after. And it was crazy. And the kid was only like 12 years old. So they said he got up in the morning, he made breakfast, like pancakes for his family, did all these things. They had plans to go out for the day. And then the dad and a couple of his siblings went out to get like coffee and hot chocolate or whatever. And they came back and he was hanging from his bunk bed. And he was on, and he had like a little photo album out of his biological mother. His dad was remarried. And there's some other things and some notes there, but like they had no idea this kid struggled. And I just wonder, like, damn, if that kid was at my tournament and he heard us talking, could we have made a difference? At least for the short term, I don't know, but could we have made a difference? But I know there's plenty of people that come up to us and they share their story, or that makes them more comfortable to talk to us about things. Whereas if we don't keep talking about it, then they're going to feel like they're being judged, or they can't share things with people, or they got to be tough and they can't be weak.
Well, you've touched on so much in that. First you talk about the guy who gave you that chip. The 3 areas that have the highest suicide rate, occupational wise, are what I would call tough men industries: construction, military, athletes. They are your 3 highest suicide rates, because their identity is their strength. Their toughness is their strength. And as I said earlier, it's so hard for them to come off that pedestal. I do a lot with the military as well, and I compare military to athletes. When we see somebody in a military uniform, they get our instant respect, whether it's a military man, a policeman, whatever the case. Same thing with an athlete. When they wear a uniform, wow, look at them. They're on a team. They're really a good athlete. But with that uniform comes the pressure, of trying to be superhuman. Well, they're not. They're just like dads, just like us, and kids just like our kids. And, they deal with the same stuff. The problem is we as a society don't allow them to put that toughness on a shelf and be vulnerable and really ask for the help they need. Your 12-year-old that you were talking about in West Virginia, as I said, he probably, when he was making his family pancakes and having all, he probably wasn't thinking about ending his life. It's something that hits them so overwhelmingly for the most part that they don't know what to do with it, and as I said earlier, we sit there and we try to wrap our heads around, because we don't understand it. So then we start to, God, if he'd only come to my tournament, could have had an impact on it. Or, geez, if Sean had just picked up his phone or called me, or if I had just picked up the phone to call Sean, could I have stopped it? But as my own therapist would say, you can't change the rules of the game. You didn't know what was going on. So to try to Monday morning quarterback and try to change those rules at that point, it doesn't happen. It's not possible to do. But, you know, as I said earlier, the effect of suicide is generational. And then when you've lost someone to suicide, I mean, there are statistics that you have to be careful because the impact has such a profound effect on your life. Parents are 10 times more likely to end their life by suicide if they've lost a child. A sibling is 4 times more likely to end their life by suicide if they've lost a brother or sister. A friend is 2 times more likely. It has ramifications that we are just starting to understand. You know, we haven't spent a lot of research and money on what goes on when someone ends their life. How do we prevent it? I mean, there are lots of theories out there and they're starting to make some headway, but we really have not done the research that we should. We lose 50,000 people a year to suicide in this country. That doesn't count those who we lose to drug overdose. You know, most people who are dealing with a substance abuse are dealing with 2 things. They're dealing with an untreated mental health issue, and now they're dealing with substance abuse. They try to self-medicate themselves through drugs and alcohol. And they say 1/3 of all overdoses are probably a suicide. So that's another 30 or 40,000 people. That means we're losing 90,000 people a year to suicide. And that is the second cause of death for kids that are 14 to 25, is becoming a huge cause of death to the elderly now. We're seeing a tremendous increase in suicide of men over the age of 65. And we've got to really delve into this very difficult subject. You talked about, you know, I don't want to put a downer on the tournament. And it is, there's a balance. How do you get the message out there? And it's a difficult message because we're talking about something that we probably have all dealt with. There's almost every family has dealt with someone who has a mental health challenge. We just don't talk about it. And that was the thing. After we lost Sean, I was amazed at how many families came to me and said, my son deals with this, my daughter deals with, I deal with this. You know, when I spoke at your tournament, I had just as many adults come up to me as kids, you know, and told me their own personal journey and what they were going through. And, you know, sometimes after I speak, people come and they'll whisper to me. And I say to them, stop whispering. Own your story. Your depression, your anxiety is part of who you are, but don't keep it a secret. If you keep it a secret, it has tremendous power over you. But if you verbalize it, if you accept that that's who you are as a person, this is something to deal with, the power is gone at that point. And then you can begin those first steps, get the help that you need.
Yeah, one of the kids, I say kids, I think he was like 17 or 18 years old. I don't know what kept, he was there as a spectator or maybe an older sibling or something this year at St. Mark's, the same tournament you spoke at. But he came up to me and said, hey, and he showed me this tattoo that he had on his wrist. And I forget exactly what it was. I want to say it was like heart something or other, but it was, he basically said, hey, I'm a survivor. And I attempted to take my life, but I've survived. And now he said, like, hey, I'm getting the help that I need. I'm on certain types of medication. I feel a lot better. And I think that's one of the things, right? And, you know, I go to the gym, and whether you're recovery, you know, in recovery or whether you have depression, but I go to the gym, I get in really good shape. And then when I'm in tip top shape, I don't stop going to the gym. I need to keep going to maintain. I think a lot of times these guys feel like, hey, I haven't done drugs or alcohol, or, you know, my depression's been good. So they think they can just stop doing what they've been doing when they need to continue to do those things to be able to maintain that level.
Correct. The medicine that you may need to take, you may need to take for the rest of your life. You probably will have to take it for the rest of your life. And the problem is people with depression or people with bipolar, they start to feel better. And then they say, okay, I don't have to take the medicine anymore. And then they stop. Well, then that just puts them on a roller coaster. They've got to consistently take their medicine for it to have the long lasting effect that it needs to have. And it's tough. I get it. it's not easy. And sometimes it's trial and errors. You have to find the right dosage of the right particular medicine, or you have to go to therapy and you have to do the hard work that the therapist wants you to do after you leave the therapy session. It's like sports. If you just go and practice once a week, you're not going to be a very good wrestler. You got to do day in and day out. You got to be dedicated to being successful. Well, it's the same thing when you're battling mental illness. You got to be dedicated to fighting that illness. And you can't just go to a therapist once every 2 weeks, talk for an hour and then think, okay, I'm good for another 2 weeks. No, you got to do the hard work that he or she tells you to do.
Yeah. So we were playing off, my wrestling organization with the name Tyrant Network, but really the network part of it comes into, I think that's everything in life, the network that we build, whether it's through business, sports, whatever it may be. So, before I get to that point, I guess, is there anything that you want to share with us that we haven't already talked about that would be important to you or wanting to get the message across that we haven't already discussed?
I mean, really, the reason why I do these conversations is to just get the word out there. Say, don't suffer in silence. Don't be like Sean. Don't hide behind a mask that everything is all right. We know it's not. So ask for the help you need, and you will feel so much better. I don't want anybody to go through the pain that I go through. And Sean would not want anybody to end their life the way he ended his life. I know that if Sean had a redo, he would like, what? Wait, back up. Let's back up. And let me redo that day. Because he loved life. He really, truly loved life. And he loved all his friends and family. So if anybody's listening, I say, look, get help. Don't fake it. Don't fake it. Get the help you need. You'll feel so much better.
So what can the Tyrant Network do to help support Unlock the Light? Like if anybody that's listening, anybody that's out there, what can we do to help support you?
Well, one, get the message out there. Let people know about Sean's house. Let people know about Sean's room. If you have a son or daughter or a friend or a family member that needs it, use the resource. That's what it's there for. If you have someone who can't afford mental health services, give us a call. We'll put them in the SL24 scholarship program. If you want to volunteer, there's all sorts of volunteer. We have a basketball tournament this weekend at the Chase Field House. You want to come and see what it's all about? It's a great event. Stop by Sean's house if you want. And I always, I'm not your typical nonprofit guy who constantly asks for donations and stuff. You give with your heart. You look at the foundation. If this resonates with you and you think this is something you want to help, we would love to have the help, whether that's your time, services, volunteer, financial, whatever the case may be. I always let people lead with their heart. So.
Yeah, I mean, I'll speak from experience. One, we've contributed financially, and two, we've given a little bit of time here and there, and we've been down to the house. And I haven't made it over to the basketball tournament yet. That's kind of in the heart of my wrestling season, but I've seen the volleyball tournament down at the beach, and people come from all over the world to play in that. But
Yeah.
You got a lot of great people down there that are working with you, and you put together something really special. So I think last but not least, then it's, if somebody's truly struggling and they're standing on a bridge or at the top of a building, or they have a gun in their hand, what I've looked at is they can call or text the National Suicide Hotline 988. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So
yeah,
at least
988. Yeah, 988. It's a simple number. Put that gun down, get off the bridge, make the call. Call someone you trust, talk to them. Do not scar your family and friends for the rest of their lives. Do not harm them. I know you don't want to harm them, so don't do it. Just call the number, call somebody, reach out, and ask for the help you need. You will live a beautiful life. I've talked to so many people who are now 50, 60, 70 years old. When they're in their 20s and 30s and early teens, they thought their life was over, and now they lived a beautiful life. God has given you this phenomenal life. He does not want you to end that book on chapter 3. He wants you to live all 30 chapters. So live all the chapters of your life, because you don't know what the next page unfolds in your story. You and I are old enough to know about trials and tribulations of life, and what do you do when you deal with a hardship, when you deal with a mistake, a failure, whatever the case may be. And we can now look back as older men and say, okay, yeah, that sucked back then, but it didn't define who I am today. And that's what I would say to people. Where you are today is not going to define where you are tomorrow, a year from now, 10 years from now. So get the help you need, and you will be a better person because you reached out for help.
Yeah, I always tell those guys, hey, I'd rather get a call at 3 o'clock in the morning from you and let's cry together than me
Yep.
get another call from a state trooper telling me that you made a decision you'll never be able to get back.
That's exactly right. That's perfect, Corey. That's exactly right.
Yeah, well, I'm sure, Chris, it doesn't get any easier, and I don't want our conversations every single time to be about this topic, but I do really appreciate you coming on the show, and maybe we can have you back for round 2, and we can talk about some investment properties and building businesses at another time. So thank you
I
so
would
much.
be honored to do so. Thanks so much, Corey. I really appreciate the time, my friend.
Thank you.
Okay,
Hold
thanks.
on.